Okay.
Hello and a very warm welcome to all of you. We're back again at Think Change India Forum with a new episode of our ongoing series titled Ideas for Rebooting the Indian Economy in the Post-Pandemic World. And those of you who have actually watched the previous series, the previous episodes of this series will recall that this series is aimed chiefly at seeking workable solutions and actionable insights into current day problems and also to reboot the Indian economy first to pre-COVID levels and then onto a more sustainable higher growth trajectory. We are meeting at a time when daily COVID-19 cases are at a manageable level. But that said, let me make a disclaimer here that we just cannot afford to let the guard down. The pace of vaccination remains the strongest arsenal, the most powerful arsenal to deal with probably humanity's biggest battle, biggest war in the 21st century. But that said, as the winter sets in and in Delhi, there's a smog in the air, there's smog in the air and there's nip in the air, but there's also a spring in the step of the economy. And how do you spot an economic revival? Well, one of the surest signs are found in the malls or in the neighborhood shopping complexes. Footfalls are back in malls that we have all seen during the festive season that have just gone by, and that continues to go. Footfalls continue to dominate malls and shopping complexes all across India, and it appears that it's not just a big city phenomenon. It's probably also spreading to smaller cities and semi-urban areas. Consumption spending, which is the strongest edifice of the India growth story, is probably regaining its mojo. So there cannot be a better time to talk about the Indian retail sector than now, when the retail sector is actually powering the revival in the Indian economy and helping India regain its lost status as the world's fastest growing major economy. So that is why we have titled today's virtual roundtable as Role of the Retail Sector for Rebooting the Indian Economy in the Post-Pandemic World. And we have a stellar panel of experts to talk about various issues around the broader economy, the retail sector, and also some specific issues that are currently dominating the discourse in the retail sector. We are delighted to have Dr. Sanjaya Baru, journalist, author, policy analyst, political commentator, and advisor, Think Change Forum, G. Padmanabhan, former executive director of the Reserve Bank of India, Harminder, Sahni, founder and MD, Wazir Advisors, and Devangshu Dutta, chief executive, Third Eyesight, managing partner, PVC. I'm absolutely delighted. It's my privilege to get you here to discuss this and making time out today. In a very wintry day here in Delhi, and a very warm welcome to all of you. Over the course of the next 45 minutes, we shall talk about a variety of issues, including some hot button areas, such as the standoff between small and large retailers, online and offline retailers, and also some very, very, very dominant controversial subject that is dominating the retail sector in India. So without much ado, let's start off today's discussion. And Dr. Baru, there cannot be a better person to know about the state of the economy, because you have been tracking the Indian economy for decades now. And you are one of those persons who knows about the state of the economy like the back of your palm. Now, if the signs from malls and shops are any indication, the economy appears to have entered a decisive phase of rebound. What's your view? Is the worst behind us?
The worst is behind us, but the best is not yet in front of us. I think that is the way I would sum up the situation. We have certainly come out of the lockdown. We have come out of the huge dip in the demand and economic activity. But there are two issues here. One is that the recovery, contrary to what the Ministry of Finance, the Chief Economic Advisor, has repeatedly said, has not been a V-shaped recovery. It has been a K-shaped recovery.
Yeah.
By which we mean that some sections of the economy have recovered very smartly and others have not. And you talk about people going to malls. First of all, I think it's interesting to check how many of them are buying in these malls, or how many of them are simply going there because they want to get out of home,
yes,
and tired of just staying at home. But the more important thing, Devangshu, is that even as consumption picks up, we still do not see any signs of investment picking up. And the slowdown of the Indian economy before COVID, the COVID was an aberration, right? It was a few months of lockdown that resulted in a sharp decline. And we are certainly recovering from that decline. even if not across the board, across the social spectrum, because
Yeah.
unemployment has increased, poverty has increased. So it's not very clear, who is consuming. I don't think we have enough data to suggest that all social groups are consuming at the same pre-COVID levels. There may be a recovery in the consumption of the rich, and certainly the richest in the country are now traveling abroad, going off to Dubai, Singapore, wherever for holidays and spending. That kind of recovery is going on. But it's not very clear to me that recovery at the bottom of the pyramid is there. If you look at the Reserve Bank of India's Consumer Confidence Index or even the
Yeah.
Business Confidence Index,
Yeah.
they're not back at pre-COVID levels. They're recovering, but they're certainly not back at pre-COVID levels. But the larger issue, which I would like to point to, is that, though our discussion today is about the retail sector, which is the link between, the supply side and the demand side. Uh, and while there are problems on the demand side, I think there are equal problems on the supply side.
Yes, absolutely.
By which I mean the level of capacity utilization has not returned to pre-COVID levels. If you look at it across many sectors, slowly, some sectors are reporting return to pre-COVID capacity utilization, but capacity utilization is still not back to pre-COVID levels across the board. Which means there is no greenfield investment happening, there's no additional capacity being built. So I would say, to use your words, the worst is behind us, but the best is not yet in front of us.
Many thanks for that insight. And it's, yes, there seems to be a K-shaped recovery, and the recovery is not, recovery is very uneven. And that these both anecdotal and headline numbers do point out that a lot needs to be done to make the recovery more broad-based and even. But Harminder, if I may come to you, most think tanks and analysts are bullish about the retail sector's prospects in India. But there's a question of the policy landscape too. From a domestic retailer's point of view, what are the policy gaps that needs to be plugged? Harminder.
I think from a domestic retailer's point of view, if you really ask me, I think there are not too many issues. Mm-hmm. Right? There are always technical stuff when service tax came on, rentals, right? And then there are a few things to do with how they can get their funding through international investors, or not multi-brand versus this thing. That I think at a micro level there are a few issues, and then at a macro level there are a few issues. But otherwise, in between, if you really look at it, I think there's nothing which is stopping them to get very, very aggressive about the sector. I think because there has been a lull in between, where a lot of consolidation happened. If you look at groups like Aditya Birla or Bharti, they exited, and there are many others who exited retail sector, and there was pretty much doomsday kind of a feeling. The retail sector is not for the large companies, or the online is going to take it all away. But we have seen that how DMart has performed, and how, let's say, Reliance has grown, and for that matter, even Aditya Birla Fashion, they chose to consolidate and focus on that sector. They have grown very, very rapidly and continue to grow. So I think the runway, and even the smaller retailers, there are lots of names across India, regional level. The number of inquiries, and we can't do anything about that, but the number of inquiries which we have received, I would say in the last 12 months from people from smaller towns, saying that I have a 10,000 square feet space, 20,000 square feet space, I want to get into retail, right? Help me do that. Just one single store. They want to get into that physical retail. So that's where sometimes all this noise which we hear about e-commerce killing physical retail is not really true. And I'll tell you the reason for that is absolutely simple in my mind, and not an economist, but just simply, I would say, commonsensically, if I look at it. The rich people are getting richer because they own the assets, right? Yeah. The asset value is growing very, very fast.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? And those assets need to be created, they need to be maintained, they need to be grown. And for they need hand and feet. That's the bottom of the pyramid. They need that janta, people, right? They need that. In between is the middle class, which used to manage.
Yeah.
A huge amount of digitization, automation, which is going in there, right? And the number of people who are becoming educated and want to fight in that job market is increasing. So I think it's the middle class, which is however we define the middle class. I define it in this way, right? The people who own, the people who work, and the people who manage. And the managers are the ones who are getting squeezed, and that's the urban population, semi-urban population, which we are looking at. And we have seen them during COVID doing multiple jobs like middle class does in US. To make ends meet. So because they were at home, they had this opportunity. Suddenly we, leapfrogged on the timelines, and we reached there. So given that, I think the greatest opportunity for retailers is lying in terms of how to service the masses, real masses of India. And that opportunity neither can be taken away by online, nor can it be taken by multinationals, nor even it can be taken by the way the traditional retailing has worked so far. I think that's where the greatest opportunity is. And we can get into details, but lots of retailers are launching those concepts, which are, like, say, literally tier 3, tier 4 kind of formats. And those are the ones who are growing the fastest.
Absolutely. It's a very,
I'm tired of giving, but can't hold back. That people like when they moved out of, let's say, using Bata shoes or buying Bata shoes, I was the one who moved out. 1,000 people walked in. Bata used to be a loss-making company, no value at all, and today is one of the valuable retail companies. And I don't buy it anymore. So I walked away, and they became better. So that's what's going to happen to a lot of consumer brands and retail.
Yeah. So you make a very interesting point. You say that the noise about online retail actually crowding out offline retail, and also at some point mom and pop stores. That risk probably is overstated. We'll probably need more data to actually drive home that point and substantiate that argument. But that's a very interesting point. And on this, let me come to you, Mr. Padmanabhan. Within the domestic retail universe, there is also the question of balancing the interest of millions of mom and pop stores and standalone hawkers alongside those of the large organized retailers. Does it not sometimes pull in opposite directions? How do we strike an equilibrium? Mr. Padmanabhan.
Gaurav, good morning. Thank you. I think most of my comments would be from the financial sector perspective, given my background. Now, I think we will all agree that the financial sector moving and concentrating on the retail sector happened or started happening much before the COVID because of the corporate sector completely going down under in respect of NPAs and things like that. But what really one issue that I have always wondered, whether I was in Reserve Bank or when I was the chairman of the Bank of India, is that what do we call by retail as far as this country is concerned? Is retail as understood by the financial sector same as the retail as is understood or required for the real sector? I probably think that there is a gap. That is where your mom and pop stores and all these kind of issues come in. So to what extent the banks are able to concentrate on what we call the larger definition of retail, which is absolutely necessary for the kind of rebound that we are talking about, becomes critical. Because if you look at the data, in fact, once I agreed to get into this, I started collecting some data from my own bank, say Axis, where I'm an independent director, started asking for data. The data shows clearly that in terms of lending to the retail sector, whatever be this, probably the bank is already there or exceeded the pre-COVID levels. That's one thing. Now, it is not very certain whether the distress which is hidden in the retail sector have all been recognized because of various concessions that have been given. That is unfolding. But clearly, in terms of funding, that has clearly happened. Yesterday, I happened to read a very interesting research paper where they are trying to see the capacity utilization in the economy from a payment system angle. And looking at the payment system angle, they say that we are almost there. And what is really driving this? In fact, they talk about a V-shaped recovery already visible. I'm not getting into a contest because I am less of an economist than any of my other honorable members are. But according to them, this whole thing is already getting driven by the retail sector because that is where the rebound is really getting seen. But having said this, I think there are issues, the policy issues, which we need to resolve between the online and the offline. And all this will have to do with whether we need, let us say, a regulation which addresses the macro issues, or do we go into the granular details where these problems come in? When it comes to a technology-led economy, probably I think that it is important for the policymakers to move little away from getting into granular details because the models differ from store to store, company to company. And the second issue I always talk about or think about is that in terms of these large e-commerce players, perhaps as far as, because if you look at the world, I can quote China, where actually the retail sector grew once the FDI into the retail sector was permitted. But we are still very hesitant to completely open up. Now, is it something to do with the fact of the business model? What is a local person, a man who is having a shop down the street where I live, worry about? He worries about this online selling when we can get things from Chandigarh and get given to me rather than getting it down. So is it important that we have some kind of, like what Zomato or Swiggy practices in a very oversimplistic way, that you can order for restaurant only within 5 kilometers of your radius rather than getting food from anywhere? One, food cannot last that long, but is that a model which needs to be a little bit debated or thought through? This is something which I always have in mind. So the policies probably will have to look at these details a little more carefully.
No, it's a very, 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 very pertinent point, and I'm glad you raised that point, because the bigger question, of course, is to create a mutually beneficial atmosphere for large MNC retailers and local large retailers, as well as standalone hawkers and standalone mom and pop stores to grow without actually getting into a tug of war of sorts. Unfortunately, however, recent evidence has been a little worrisome. Devangshu, Dutta, how do we address this?
I think why there's this whole contention about the retail sector and the policy, we have to put that in context. Retail touches every life in the country, every life on the planet, right? It touches with the most sensitive products, like food products, for instance, which is a necessity of life, a basic necessity of life. So therefore, when you kind of get involved in that, it is a sensitive area from that point of view. Secondly, in the case of India, and India is not unique in this, world over this has happened, there is the contest between large and small, which has happened, which has unfolded in countries around the world. There's no reason why India should be unique. The fact is that in India, bulk of the businesses are small, and they're micro. They're not even small, they're micro. Therefore, if you recall, a few years ago, there was this whole hullabaloo about against Reliance, for instance, in some states, as Reliance was expanding its footprint. Today, it is against Amazon, Flipkart, etc. It's not against yes, of course, there's an issue of foreign versus local, but it's not just that. It's the small versus large. Why that happens? Because retail as a business is probably among the most distributive instruments you have for income and wealth. When you look at the economy, given the fact that it's touching everybody, and given the fact that you have the bulk of the businesses involved in it are small, you have a lot of interfacing going on between consumers who buy small and retailers who sell small quantities. The moment a large player steps into this mix, you have a disturbance in the competitive landscape, and that I think is something for the government to take care of in terms of managing the competitive landscape rather than putting artificial barriers, as Mr. Padmanabhan said, getting into the micromanagement of policy. If you can make sure that the competitive landscape is diverse enough, I think we can maintain a healthy mix. And there's, as Harminder said earlier, there's a place for everybody. There is a customer who will want to go only to a mall or only to a large retail store. There is a customer who will never step into that because they feel that there is added cost which I don't need to pay for. And they're both right in their own.
So in many ways, it should not be a zero-sum game. So somebody's gain should not be somebody's loss, and the size of the pie should keep on increasing with a space for every small to large retailer to operate, and for consumers also the choice remains ever expanding. So that's a good point to actually bring in the question of bring in the issue of the Amazon future reliance issue. Amazon's the question here is that Amazon's attempt to foil and allegedly foil future retail's decision to sell its retail, wholesale, and logistics and some other businesses to Reliance for about 25,000 crore has now been subjected to very serious legal and policy scrutiny. But that's a matter of legal interpretation. We'll not get into that, the specifics of that. But the big question that domestic retailers are asking is, does Amazon intend to get into the brick and motor retailing space? Is this an attempt to get a backdoor entry into India's very vibrant brick and mortar retailing, offline retailing space? Or are these investments and legal efforts are actually tactical moves aimed at scuttling competition? And the point that Devangshu made, scuttling on the point about competition, are they trying to actually, by doing all of this, is Amazon actually trying to scuttle competition just to remain a dominant player in one of the world's fastest growing retail markets? Harminder, what's your view on this?
Yeah, I think they are well within their rights to compete and well within their rights to try to dominate, because I think it's not only in retail, it's anywhere else. I think that's the thing which everybody's after. Otherwise, beyond a point, what does money mean? What does market share mean? It means nothing. And I think we have seen it that unless until you are striving for it, right, and competing really, really hard, you will become irrelevant, stagnant, and maybe die at some point of time. So I think they're well within their rights as well as well within their duties to be trying to do that. But anything which they are trying to do by, let's say, circumventing the law, obviously is wrong. That we should not be doing, and I'll always maintain that. Otherwise, I think the policy, the way it has been, and I've been involved in that part since maybe late 90s, right? And I've seen that how the policy works in India from a very, very far distance, I would say, even if I would have seen the draft policies, but still very limited understanding. But it's always about tweaking incrementally. So any document which comes, takes life, it doesn't go away. It never ever becomes, okay, let's do it on a clean slate. You cannot dismiss any document which has come into being, right? Which is a very common thing which we do in daily life. Here, let's start on a clean slate. Let's leave what we are discussing. Okay, now we all understood, it's all in our head, but push the papers away. Let's write it on a clean piece of paper that what do we really want? So I think that's where things have moved so fast that incremental changes. Trust me, and again, I would say that within this panel or even outside this panel, people will think that some of us are experts on this area. Trust me, don't quiz me on this policy, right? I will look foolish just trying to explain to you that what all happened at what point of time and what clause talks to the next clause and all of that. So I think that's the reason why people like Amazon, they have been trying to play into within those loopholes, because loopholes have been created, right? And that's otherwise, if you ask me, I think Amazon wanting to dominate or not wanting to dominate, it's not even a question, because they should. If they are in the market, they should, right? And that's what they are trying to do. They have indirect control over, they acquired more. They are now trying to get into future retail. They're trying to control that. But so that's how it will play out, and Reliance will try their best to keep it.
Yeah, I don't think anyone is questioning Amazon's play in the market to become a dominant player, and everyone, even a small retailer, likes to dominate the market, would like to dominate them, because business, after all, is a quest for profit maximization. So that no one is questioning that. But what has been brought into question is there are two aspects to it. One is Amazon's intent and spirit, and the means that they have adopted. Say, for instance, the Competition Commission has reportedly accused Amazon of concealing facts, and that's a very, very big. It's not a small accusation. If Amazon had actually concealed facts and made false submissions when it sought approval for for an investment in future retail, which made in 2019, it does raise questions on serious policy gaps that exist in India, and also raise questions on the extent to which an MNC a transnational retailer can go to actually dominate a market, even if it could actually be bordering on unfair means. What's your view on that, Harminder?
So very clearly, I think that's what I said, the loops also have been created and somebody's trying to take advantage of that. It's so confusing that this way or that way, they're trying to find their way into it, right? So, but otherwise, if you ask me in terms of the dominance, if you talk about it, look at the numbers, and you will find that at this point of time, even Reliance, at whatever scale they are, right, they still don't own more than 2% of whatever category we may talk about, right? Because we did some maths, and just to tell you, we are talking here about the fight between the organized retailers, within that the offline and online retailers, within that the Indian large companies and internationally large companies, right, multinationals who are coming in here. But just to give you a simple number, like Ms. Padmanabhan saying that they saw it from the research paper, saw it from the payments point of view. We said that, okay, rather than trying to say who all have not come to the malls, so far or enjoyed the organized retail in India, let's just go by the cumulative footfall numbers, and then there is some data available which may not be very accurate. How often the people who go to the malls, they go to the malls. We did the simple maths on that. Barely 29% of the population of India has ever been to a mall. 71% of India's population, and most of those people are invisible to us. We don't even think they should ever go to the mall. Even if they go to parking and then, right? 71% of India's population has never been to a mall. So maybe it doesn't say that the 71% of people have never ever interacted with organized retail, right? Or into a organized store where they can walk in. They have been buying over the counter. So I think the amount of runway which is available to be organized, the amount of runway, amount of the population, amount of the market, and in a growing market, it's not stagnant. It's a growing market. Like earlier also said, the growth is, don't know how the poverty numbers are looking like, but you look at the salaries of the housemates and the daily wages laborers and the drivers and all of it, how it's been growing even during COVID and now, right? So there is a lot more money than what they used to have and they're wanting to spend. So within that dominance of anyone at this point of time is a far-fetched fear. And for that matter, I think like any other industry, just one more minute. Any other industry that to grow, we need FDI, we need technology. And retail has been a technology business even before most of us even started talking about technology. In 96, first time ever, my experience with Walmart. And I heard one of my senior partners in KSA tell us that Walmart is not a retail company, it's a data company. On those days, used to save data on floppy disks. And he said that the number of floppy disks which Walmart generates in a year, if you put them one next to each other, it will reach moon, right? That much data they were collecting in 1996. So it's a technology business, it's a data business. And for that, you need expertise, and Indian market will gain from whosoever can bring that to the market. But obviously within the limits of the law and doing it the right way and not trying to...
Absolutely. No, I don't disagree with anything that you were saying, but the question here is obviously whether they're on the wrong side of the India's FDI rule book for multi-brand retail, but I'll come to that in a moment. Before that, let me go to Mr. Padmanabhan. Mr. Padmanabhan, we cannot afford this case, for instance, to drag on for too long because there are two reasons here. One, there will be huge job losses, and two, Indian banks will lose lots of money. How do you think that we can avoid these kind of cases? Is there something that needs a policy overhaul?
Gaurav, I completely agree. But I am having driven policy from the Reserve Bank. Particularly, one of the departments reporting to me was the foreign exchange department. So most of these FDI issues and all have gone through me. I'm a little skeptical about most of the issues that happen in the market. Now, you cannot have competition on a two-rule principle. The first rule is that wherever it suits me, and I need to have the rules in my favor to disrupt wherever possible. But when it comes to somebody disrupting my business, I want protection. This is the way in which I'm not naming A, B, C. This is the way most of the things and most of the cases which come to us, that please understand that when it is a foreign company tying with an Indian company, the legal firms who are advising both the companies are the Indian legal firms. It is not as if the rules are being read differently by the foreigners and us. So I walked into this open-eyed because I found an advantage in walking in. And when things turn against me, again, please, I'm reiterating, I'm not referring to this particular case, but the cases which I've seen in my service in Reserve Bank. When it goes against me, I want the regulator, I want the government, I want everybody to protect me. This cannot work. Now, two things need to change. First of all, I think the contracts will have to be cast in stone without any ambiguity. And I also agree that your policies, wherever it leaves a scope for interpretation. Now, I would argue two things. One is, maybe it is not possible, given the fast changing world driven by technology, had to have the best of regulation on day one. It has to be incremental in some way or the other. But the most important point is the agility with which you are able to respond to this requirement. If an issue is getting flagged to you as a central bank or as a regulator or as whatever it is, competition commission, we must be able to come out with our decision quite quickly rather than allowing the matter to drag. sometimes I wonder some of the issues have become bigger than what it ought to be in this country because of the sheer passage of time.
Okay, so yeah, it's a good point. And Dr. Baru, let me get you in here. Do you think we need an independent retail regulator to regulate the retail sector, or do you think the Competition Commission of India can play a larger and more proactive role to bring in better regulations? Because there are lots of opaqueness in policy, and lots of, as Mr. Padmanabhan has said, is also a matter of subjective interpretation. To make the laws and the rules more, leaving less scope for interpretation, do you think we need an independent regulator for the retail sector?
You know, the history of
Dr. Baru?
The history of regulation in India is that every regulator is in theory independent, in practice it is not. There is complete regulatory capture in this country. And we should not, at least outside of the government, live in this imaginary world that there is an independent regulator. No regulator today is independent. Let me say that very categorically. I've been both in the media and in government, and I can tell you this. And Competition Commission of India has been made toothless. You look at the composition of the Competition Commission of India. They have not even filled all the positions, and look at their activity, look at the level of activity, look at their ability to, in fact, punish people who are contravening competitive requirements in any business. So all this nonsense about regulation coming in to help is utter nonsense. We live in an economy in which the powerful are able to set the rules. And as Mr. Padmanabhan has correctly said, if you're powerful enough, you'll say the rules don't favor me, therefore change the rules. And your politicians are willing to change those rules. The fact is that Amazon is facing issues about regulation and competition and monopolistic and oligopolistic behavior across the world, not just in India. The regulators in the US, regulators in Europe are questioning Facebook, Amazon, many of these global multinationals. And therefore, I think in India, a healthy debate is required on their market practices. Healthy skepticism is required on their impact on competition, on their ability to allow other players to function. And therefore, I joined this debate because I think we need this kind of a discussion on whether the regulators are effective, whether regulation is effective, whether competitive conditions are being ensured, whether Competition Commission of India is actually functioning in the way it should. These are all serious questions which are not adequately being asked.
Absolutely.
And Amazon is enjoying a lot of advantage because of its market power. Frankly, at the end of the day, apart from Reliance, nobody else seems to have the market power to challenge Amazon.
Absolutely. And, it's a very good point you raised. And, the whole point about the Competition Commission of India being actually rendered toothless is a very important point, because Competition Commission of India, when it was brought about and it was institutionalized, and it replaced MRTPC, and you know it more than anyone else in this country, the process of setting up the Competition Commission and the promise that it held out. Unfortunately, however, in instances like this, the Competition Commission actually has failed, if I may use the word, failed to deliver on the right practice, on setting the right practice and the right kind of judgment. Say, for instance, in this particular case, the CCI has said that Amazon has actually made false disclosures. And that's a serious allegation, that's a serious accusation. If the Competition Commission of India, which is the country's antitrust regulator, is saying that should have been taken very, very seriously. If a similar antitrust regulator in a different country, say in the US or anywhere in Europe, would have said a similar thing, all hell would have broken loose. Unfortunately, nothing has happened in India, and the case drags on. So I completely agree with you on that point. But I would like to, Dr. Baru, I would like to know your views on a point that Harminder raised, is that policy is incremental, and that policy making in India is largely an incremental activity, and that probably has its own flaws, and that results in design flaws of various policies that we come about. But my question is, just to play the devil's advocate, can policy making be a greenfield activity in a country like India, where we are a development latecomer, and two, where it's a kind of a paradox, both on the income, both on the economic scale as well as on the social point of view?
Well, first of all, I agree with Mr. Harminder on this point. I think he's absolutely right that we don't simply erase past wrong policies. We try to incrementally improve upon them and complicate it, and therefore give a lot of business to lawyers to interpret law. The last time we actually did any such real, erasure and writing on a clean paper was in 1991, when a lot of laws were simply erased, and complete. The past was made irrelevant, and then we set on to a new course, whether on industrial licensing, whether on retail trade, whether on tariff policy. In a range of areas, the government at that time did not do incremental policy change. It did fundamental policy change. But after that, we've done a lot of incremental policy, and I agree with that. But the problem today in many of these areas is that I don't understand why politically there is no willingness to do the obvious. I mean, my friend Vivek Debroy, who's now chairman of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, I used to publish articles by him in the Financial Express when I was editor about all the irrelevant laws that we have in this country. And he calculated at one stage, there are several hundred laws on paper which are of absolute no relevance. And, he has struggled over the years to get governments to, simply say that this law no longer exists. We still function under colonial laws. I mean, when COVID hit us, what was the law that was used for the government to deal with the COVID pandemic? It was a Tropical Diseases Act or whatever, 1897. The British had enacted an act to deal with widespread disease. And even today for law and order, we use a sedition law brought by the British.
Yes.
So I think there is need for greenfield thinking, as you call it, and I completely agree with that point, that there are a lot of idiocy in our laws, and those simply have to be erased, and new thinking is necessary because the economy is changing. I mean, there's no denying, even if it's not growing at the pace we would like it to, there is certainly change. And when law has to conform to this change and be able to accommodate change.
That is right. It's a good point. And let me bring in Devangshu here. Dr. Baru made the point about the power of Amazon and power of companies like Amazon, which are very global in their activity, in their operations. They command a lot of power because of the data that they acquire, and their market practices have been brought into question in various geographies, and India is no exception. Now, say for instance, if you take this particular case, Amazon, if you go by the sheer letter of the rule book of FDI in retail, Amazon will be on the wrong side of the FDI's rule book for multi-brand retail in this dispute, because by persona as well as by activity, Amazon is an online retail company. Assuming if the ruling goes in favor of Amazon, will this not be a mockery of India's FDI laws?
Sure. So I think, Gaurav, you asked an earlier question, and the first part of that question was about the strategy of Amazon to step into offline retail, and whether it was an intentional strategy or whether it was just a block move as far as competition was concerned. And I think that's where an issue, a problem is. This whole divide between online and offline is artificial. Retail is one business. You have different formats, different channels, and companies adopt different channels depending on whatever their strategy may be. The question about whether Amazon will want to step into offline is already answered. Amazon is already offline. They acquired a very large company in the US, which was a clear intent, not even starting with greenfield. They just acquired an existing company, right? And that kind of speaks to that point about the artificiality of this divide. And therefore, any regulation which seeks to divide the retail business into this online offline world, and kind of what we've seen in the last several years, and then you kind of link it to FDI, saying FDI will be allowed in this, that, and the other, there is bound to be non-compliance. And this case is not unique. Again, there are plenty of other cases which anywhere you've had FDI in retail, I can guarantee you there would have been some non-compliance or the other. It's not possible for any company to be 100% in compliance of the law as it stands. It just takes a little bit of digging. So that means that we have bad law. One is intent.
Yeah.
One is the intent to dominate and use every every weapon in your arsenal to dominate the market. The second is you have a bad law. Now let's fix those laws. And I think we do need to ensure that these loopholes which have been created are, it's really, it's a tangled mess and you have a loophole in the middle and somebody wants to get through that. Just untangle the whole thing and say, this is how we go. Or you do what China did, which I don't think is possible in India.
Yeah.
When China opened up to FDI,
Absolutely.
they said, you cannot hold more than 26% and we will allow you to do business in these, whatever, 5, 6, handful of cities. And you cannot go outside of that. And then they incrementally allowed foreigners to own more and more, share and more, expand their business. But that gave enough runway for the domestic companies to build scale, which was what they wanted. So there was strategic intent on the government's part, on the political parties' part, on the businesses' part, to make sure that Chinese business dominates. We've missed that bus, that boat has sailed. Let's not even go there. So we need to create a landscape which allows as much as is possible. And, policy capture happens again across the world. It's not, again, something which is unique to India. Large companies dominate policy, that we know that happens. But if we can create a space, if we can create a landscape where small businesses can survive and thrive, you will ensure that there is healthy competition, because the market leads. Policy doesn't lead, the market leads. And if you can ensure that there is healthy competition, large companies will compete amongst themselves, but there will be enough small competition as well.
But Gaurav, if I can come in and just say one, I think the bad policy, let us accept. Some of these policies, there are problems. But my worry or agony has been that, are you not seeing what is happening around you? Everybody knew what Amazon was doing from day one. Everybody knew that a building was coming up in Mumbai without, which was a violation. Then you allow this thing to compete, and unless there is a court case or there is a problem, then you try to intervene and set right. It is much more complicated than nipping the problem at the bud. So unless we are going to argue that the people who have written the rule itself are not sure about what they have written, then we have a problem. Otherwise, I think it's a more issue of, taking action at the appropriate time.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you, because most of these actions have been reactive rather than proactive. Last questions to all our panelists, the same question. Having discussed all of this, do we now think, do you think that we need more tighter rules for MNC e-commerce platforms so that it gives a level playing field for Indian traders? Devangshu?
I think as far as rules are concerned, like I said, I think we need a cleaner set of rules, which everybody can understand and interpret the same way. The moment you allow for interpretations and malinterpretations of rules, that's where the problem starts. So if you can have a clean set of rules, that's fine. Clean the slate, as Harminder said. I think that's a great intent to have as far as laws are concerned. So if you can do that, and if you can make the rules simple, like I said, make it simple enough for the small business to comply with it, the market will kind of correct itself.
Harminder, do you think that our rules are a bunch of gobbledygook and we need to simplify them? And also, there's a case for
absolutely. And if you give me a few more seconds to respond to that, I think not only are it policymakers, I think all of us are very reactionary in nature. Just see the whole debate. We never even talked about Walmart or Flipkart, because what is the headline these days? It's only Amazon, Future, and Reliance. How quietly Amazon still has not been able to create the business which Flipkart created, and Walmart simply walked in and acquired it, right? And they're a larger player and they have far more reach, right? In Indian consumers' minds, if you think about it, right? And they have far more infrastructure which they acquired, and very quietly, and they are building from there. And nobody even talks about it. They must be so pleased and amused also at some point of time. And lawyers may not be very happy because one lesser client for them, right? But this is what's going on. So we are all very reactionary, so to say. So I think as a country itself, we need to start thinking in a much more cleaner way, straightforward way, rather than complicated. And like it was said that 1991, Dr. Baru said that when we wrote the economic policy on a clean slate. Now today, retail industry, I think, is far larger than what was the size of the total economy in 1991. So I think it deserves to be, it's large enough, it's serious enough, it's important enough to be So not only the intent, I think it's our duty, and I think we should be under severe pressure to do something about it as quickly as possible.
Right. Dr. Baru, do you think that there's a case for some degree of protectionism for Indian traders, small traders, even if we allow actually transnationals to come into the Indian market?
Oh, I think it's a very tricky question, because once you use the word protection, it's not very clear how you provide that protection. But the most important consideration in my mind as an economist looking at the Indian economy is the need to protect livelihoods and employment.
Yeah.
And this is a huge challenge which we often don't think about. And as one of my co-panelists said, the retail sector provides enormous amount of employment as well as protects livelihoods. And any development, whether it's a multinational or an Indian large firm like a Reliance, that reduces the level of employment and that hurts livelihoods in the retail sector, to my mind, that is very damaging. Because the responsibility of any government in a democracy is to ensure that people's livelihoods are protected. So I would look at the whole issue from that point of view. Small retail, the neighborhood vegetable vendor, the neighborhood kirana store are all providing employment, even if not in optimum manner, below market wage, for example, or the wage rates are not properly determined. There is very little protection for these workers, etc. But still, there is some amount of employment being generated and being protected. And if we find that the large retail is reducing employment opportunities, to me, that will be a source of worry. Otherwise, given the fact that we have opened up the entire economy to foreign investment, and now we have opened up defense to foreign investment, we are allowing FDI in defense manufacturing. I don't think we can justify not allowing FDI in retail. But there are two issues. One I mentioned, which is livelihood protection. The second is competition. And there we have not been successful in ensuring competition across many sectors. And this is only one of them. As I said, the Competition Commission is a toothless tiger. It's not been able to really function effectively. We need to strengthen competitive laws, institutions, ensure competition. And this is something I would worry about much more.
Mr. Padmanabhan, last word to you. We have seen recently, Amazon founder Jeff Bezos' effigies being burned by traders. And do you think there is a serious risk of employment loss if someone like Amazon actually comes and completely rides roughshod over Indian markets and dominates it?
No, at least the statistics and the records from other countries don't show at a macro level there'll be the loss unless we get our rules right, or the other way around, negatively, unless we get our rules completely wrong. But having said that, all the issues that Dr. Baru flagged are quite critical. And as far as your rule making, I completely agree, because we still depend on the British legal language to write out circulars. I think it has to be made simpler, direct. There should be no scope for interpretation. And a simple rule, at least what I used to follow, was that there must be clearly in the mind of the regulator and the government that what cannot be done directly cannot be done indirectly in any manner. Once we are able to do that, I think we will get it right.
Absolutely, well said. And what cannot be done directly should not be, shouldn't be allowed to be done indirectly. And that seems to be probably happening in the Amazon case, going by what the Competition Commission of India recently said, that they have actually made some false disclosures so far as this future retail deal is concerned. Thank you so much to all our panelists for this very insightful discussion. Dr. Sanjaya Baru, Mr. G. Padmanabhan, Harminder, Sahni, and Devangshu Dutta for dropping by, as always, with your insightful views on a very important topic that is currently dominating the discourse in India. We'll meet again for another episode of this insightful series that we'll bring to you from Think Changing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gaurav.
Thanks, Gaurav. Thank you.